1, 2, 3.
Action.
Go. We'll just edit that in to say that I was drunk and that was me moving. Right, so as advertised, I'm Dr. Charlie Ball, Head of Higher Education Intelligence at Graduate Prospects. Prospects is the higher education body. We're charged with support of careers, services and professionals. We have an official remit. We are a part of the higher education sector. And my role is best reduced down to I am the stats nerd. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the labour market for graduates. This is going to cover university leavers of all kinds, from first degree to PhD. Well, there's a little bit about PhD, mostly going to cover first degree graduates. So we're going to talk about the state of the labour market. It's going to be quite stats heavy. Don't fixate too much on the exact numbers. The direction of travel is what's important, besides anybody who wants a copy of the presentation and the annotation, which will thankfully leave out all my jokes, will be able to have them at the end of the presentation. So we're going to cover what the state of the labour market is. We're going to cover how graduates migrate around the country. We're going to look at some issues to do with postgraduates. We're going to look at going forward. We're going to cover a series of other questions, like how to spot middle class people. We're going to look at why Sheffield is unusual. And then at the end, especially for Jill, we've got a graph that explains Brexit.
Oh.
So here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is tackle a few myths about the university and the graduate labour market. A lot of people believe things that simply aren't true. Here we see a leading member of the Catholic Church dealing with some questions about things that are not necessarily actually in existence. Father Maguire there. But I'm going to talk about some things about the university and the graduate jobs market that a lot of people believe but are not necessarily actually the case. And when I say a lot of people, we're talking a lot of people in the press. We're talking, unfortunately, a lot of people involved in policy. We even cover some of these things are believed by people in education as well. So the first one is the idea that everyone has a degree nowadays. Now, a lot of the debate about higher education has come about, and we've got to the point where it's felt that universities and degrees are ubiquitous in the labour market. Very, very common. The market has become saturated. In fact, university is and remains a minority sport in this country. Most of the population has not studied post-18. Most of the workforce doesn't have a degree or an equivalent qualification. 38% of the added population at the end of 2016 had a higher education qualification, but 43.5% of the workforce did, because you are much more likely to be in work if you have a degree or an equivalent qualification than if you have not. It may be somewhat of a truth, it's important to demonstrate data, but nevertheless, most people haven't been to university and never will, and most young people, absent a very, very serious change in policy, will not take a post-18 qualification. The only place where this doesn't follow is actually Scotland, where about 51% of 14 to 18-year-olds will be expected to go to university at some point in their lives. In the UK, it's about 42 to 45% of young people. Now, what's quite interesting is that proportion of the adult population has grown quite relatively slowly since the large expansion. But the portion of the workforce that has a degree or equivalent qualification is growing more quickly. We'll look at some of the data on that later on when we look at some of the broader annual population survey data. So I say we are not going to get to a situation where half the population has a degree, but we may well get to the point where half the workforce does. We may well see that, and if we do see it, it's likely to happen within the next decade. The reason why this myth comes out is because actually the propensity to go to university is extremely class-based. And this is how you can spot a middle-class person, because the only people who say this are middle-class people, because everybody they know generally has gone to university. So if you are from St Albans, for example, 75% of the population in St Albans has been to university. Whereas if you're from my neck of the woods in Wigan, about 30% of the population has been to university or taken post-18 qualification. And if you are one of the media opinion formers, or in higher education policy, or honestly working in higher education most of the time, most of the people you know have been to university. Most of the people you work with, most of the people you went to school with, your children, often your parents all went to university. So it's not surprising that sometimes we get this idea coming from policy and coming from the centre that everybody has a degree, because everybody that they know does have a degree. So here we've got a happy plumber. He's happy because he didn't go to university, and therefore he's better off. Because as we know, most of the people going to university don't need to go, much better off learning a trade. Absolutely a truism. I certainly read it in the Daily Telegraph quite recently, so it must be true. Here is a very straightforward graph. It's much, much more complicated than this, but here is a very straightforward graph and a set of figures. So this is unemployment rates over the last 10 years. The bottom line is for people who've been to university across the whole economy, age 16 to 64. The unemployment rate peaked at a mighty 4.4% during the recession, and is now down below 3% for graduates in general. The next graph is for young graduates. The next line is, the green line is for young graduates aged 21 to 30. That unemployment rate peaked at 7.1% during the recession in 2012. The depth of the graduate labour market, currently below 5%. So a young graduate aged 21 to 30 is less likely to be able to work than somebody who's not been to university in general, aged 16 to 64. The unemployment rate for non-graduates is currently running at about 6%. And the unemployment rate for young non-graduates is around 7.7%. You are less likely to be out of work if you've got a degree. What's a little more interesting to me is that those two figures at the bottom. This is always very interesting when I go to a whiteboard and talk about policy. What's the average graduate salary? £32,000. Now, there's an interesting exercise to be done here. So when I talk to people involved in policy and planning, £32,000. Is that all? Is that data correct? Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Is that starting salary?
No, that's the average salary for all people with a degree in the economy is £32,000. Is that all they say? That's not going to pay off our student loan bill. People just don't get paid as much as you expect. Here's a good thought exercise, or here's a good exercise. Ask people how much they think other people get paid. Give them a list of professions. Ask them how much they think professionals get paid. They will overestimate all of them. The only profession people consistently underestimate the pay for is nursing. People think nurses get paid less than they do. But when you tell them how much nurses get paid, in general, they'll say, that's not enough. But in general, people think other people get paid more than they actually do. It's a very interesting exercise to try that. Non-graduates, on average, the average salary at the end of 2016 was £22,500. It's not a lot of money, and it is a wide gap. Now, obviously, across age groups, it differs. One of the things that one of the changes that recession made was that before the recession, somebody who had worked from 18 to 21 would earn more at 22 than a new graduate who'd just left university. They'd earn more than new graduates on average for 1 year of their careers. That's all, but they would earn more at the university gates. Since the recession, that's no longer the case. The average earnings of a non-graduate now never exceeds the average earnings of a graduate. And of course the gap widens up until the point that people's careers start plateauing out, usually in their 40s. Now graduates also plateau higher and later than non-graduates, so that gap widens and widens and widens. The average gap is £9,500. Yeah, the gap between average salaries of graduates and non-graduates, £9,500. So it makes you think, when you think the average working life is now, for somebody who leaves university at 21 has got at least 45 years of working life ahead of them. It's very easy to see how some of those apparently fanciful figures for graduate premium might actually translate quite quickly with a gap like that at points in people's careers into quite a large work premium for degrees. I'm not proposing to talk any more about the graduate premium because it's hard to calculate. All the figures are wrong. I'm not that convinced it's that useful a way to demonstrate the value of university study, but it's nevertheless worth noting that gap is so large. Of course, going hand in hand is, and there aren't any jobs for graduates, there are too many graduates, all this kind of story. It's quite a long-lasting myth. Certainly, I've been reading back about the debates at Oxford and Cambridge in Victorian times. Matthew Arnold, the great educationalist Matthew Arnold, leading a debate about whether it was appropriate to teach sciences in universities at all, because you didn't need to teach sciences at universities, because universities were gentlemen and science was an amateur pursuit. There was no need to study science at university, because you wouldn't be a gentleman if you did it. And actually, at the same time, the British Army would not allow engineers or scientists to be officers, because the Duke of Cambridge, who ran the British Army, didn't feel that any engineer could possibly be a gentleman, and therefore wasn't fit to be an officer of the British Army. At that time, we then expanded the university system to what are now considered the red brick universities. They were looked down upon terribly because they had industrial links and industrial sponsorships. And there was a rhyme that went around in the 10s and 20s after Birmingham University and Manchester University, Manchester, to alleviate a terrible financial crisis that they had, made links with Tate and Lyle, the sugar producers. So the rhyme went round, they give degrees for making jam at Manchester and Birmingham. Of course, the idea now that those universities are not considered second-rate options is not quite so prevalent, although I don't know if anybody remembers there's a famous scene in Yes, Minister, where Sir Humphrey is asked about his view of universities. He said, we must protect our universities. Which ones? Both of them. But certainly my personal experience was in the 80s. I went to a grammar school in the 80s. Went to my careers advisor. I talked to him about the university that I wanted to go to. And I said, this is the right university for me. I want to study chemistry. I've been to the open day. It was really enjoyed it. They were really forward thinking. He said, no, you don't want to go there. It's a new university. No one will take you seriously. But I went to Warwick anyway. Anyway, there aren't any jobs for graduates. This is the Delhi bit. So we know that 128,000 UK graduates got professional level jobs 6 months after graduating. About 71% of graduates, the highest proportion that we know of since we started taking account of this particular measure. I'm not going to go into the SOC, Standard Occupational Classification debate. I did that earlier today, about what is a graduate job and what is a professional level job. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're close enough for government work, as the phrase goes, and indeed they are close enough for government work, because what government uses. 66% of graduates, when unquestioned, although this wasn't, they didn't, not all answered the survey, said that they felt their degree was a requirement or a qualification. But if you look at whole economy data, the annual population survey shows that at the end of 2016 there are 14.17 million people working in professional level jobs in the UK. Now, when you set aside the one large area of professional employment that is a big employer that is non-graduate, which is shopkeeping, you still see that about 44-45% of the workforce are in these professional level jobs. Now, the thing about these professional level jobs is they are increasingly difficult, very, very hard to get into now without post-18 qualifications. There are a lot of people in them now who works their way up, but in some sectors, so if you look at the very interesting work of Francis Green and Gola Hensiker, for example, who one of the things that they've been looking at is the way that older workers in retail management are being, who have non-higher education qualifications, are being extracted from the workforce essentially and not being able to get back in because it's felt that their skills and knowledges are not up to the demands of the retail sector as they are now. They're being replaced by graduates. When you look at moves like the Police Federation's move, the College Policing's move last year, that was 2018, I remember this last year and not still 2017. In 2017, the College of Policing said they wanted policing to become a graduate level job because police officers now, because of resource cuts, the individual policing job has got more components to it, it's got more technology in it, it requires more sensitive interactions with the public, it's just more demanding, and so they think it's more a degree level job. And what we've got is we've got a lot of people working in professional level roles who, if they were asked to reapply for those jobs now, on the criteria that new entrants are judged on, might find it difficult. In fact, we've got more people in professional level jobs than we have university leavers in the UK. Does that mean we don't have enough graduates then, actually? As we'll see, probably in the last couple of years, we probably haven't produced enough graduates in the UK. It's very much against the run of how the national conversation is going, but we probably didn't quite produce enough graduates. That doesn't mean we produced graduates in the right subjects or who studied the right things, because we don't centrally plan all of this stuff. But it's quite likely that with the way the economy has expanded and the places where the economy has expanded in the last couple of years, we're probably in a process just at the moment where we aren't quite producing enough people with higher education qualifications. And APS data shows that the UK added 441,000 new professional level jobs last year, and 291,000 new graduates entered the workforce at all levels from all nationalities entered the UK workforce. So we had to find 150,000 extra higher education qualified people from somewhere. Thank goodness we haven't done anything to make that harder in the last year or so. Here's one then, and Tristram's gone, so he doesn't know that as stories from his report, or at least idea. We're all working more flexibly. Everybody's moving towards portfolio careers in the gig economy, etc., etc. Here are working hours from 1992 for the last 25 years. As we can see, most people are working a standard 31 to 45 hour week, just as they were in 1992. What has changed a little bit is we've got rather fewer people working very long hours. Not a lot fewer, but a little fewer, and slightly more people working 16 to 30 hours. But by and large, the pattern has not changed very significantly. What's actually happened is that some specific sectors have changed a lot. So one thing I did look at is, are graduates working on working in different forms of contract, and has that changed over the last few years? And actually, yes, there are more graduates working part-time, there are more graduates working in multiple jobs, there are more graduates in self-employment, but they are largely in a handful of sectors, particularly in the creative arts and some in IT, a few in education. But for most university graduates and most university leavers, actually there's been very little change to the way that they work for the last 20 to 25 years. So for engineers, most professionals, there has been little change. Some areas there has been a great deal. I'll talk a little bit about 0 hours contracts later on, but the short version is that 0 hours contracts are not a graduate issue in general. Graduates only work for big businesses. You get this a lot. Oh, see, we've cut the top off there. Come on. Graduates only work for big businesses. Again, it's not obviously. People know that this isn't true, but because a lot of the debate is dominated by large employer voices or bodies dominated by large employers, you do kind of get the impression that the main form of graduate employment is on big training schemes. Another thing that's worth going to is talking to prospective university students in year 12 and year 13 and ask them what they think a graduate job is. If you talk, my experience of talking to young people about what they think a graduate job is they think a graduate job is a job on a graduate training scheme, on a formal graduate training scheme. And then when you ask them, do you think you're going to get one? A lot of them will say no. Is that a problem? No. I don't think it's a problem. Because what their idea of what a graduate job is, it's one of these marquee roles on a big graduate training schemes, which account for about 10 to 15% of the whole graduate employment experience, graduate workforce in any given year. About a third of graduates went to work for companies with less than 250 employees, although actually this data is shifted still further by the fact that the largest employer of graduates is, which organisation is the largest employer of graduates in the UK?
NHS.
It's the NHS. And all NHS hospitals are large businesses. So when you take hospitals out, about 40% of graduates start their career, because that many graduates go to work for hospitals, about 40% of graduates work for small businesses, or start their careers with small businesses. And 1 in 6 of the companies with fewer, about 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 are with small businesses with less than 50 employees. Particularly important in the arts, design, architecture, marketing, sport, law, and generally any area with any city with a large, thriving private sector has a strong SME sector, and actually a very good way of examining the health of the city's labour market in general, particularly the skilled labour market, is to take a look at the SME sector. So somewhere like Manchester, for example, where we're based, has a very strong graduate labour market, has a very strong SME sector, particularly in marketing and advertising. In the northern quarter, so if you throw a brick out of a window in the northern quarter, you'll smash the window of a marketing agency. Whereas Liverpool, just down the East Lancashire Road, actually one of the reasons why its graduate labour market is not as strong but is improving is because its SME sector is quite small and really quite oriented around the arts. The arts are very, very important in this context because they're often, if you like, the seed corn for developing a good skilled SME sector, and one excellent way that institutions can help to boost local economies is a good, potent arts offering that can help to boost small businesses and help to improve employment in that area. And that's one area, one of the many areas that the arts is hugely valuable to economic development. SME graduate employment is stronger in London and the south of England, but the large cities are also very important. But the proportion entering SMEs does seem to be falling, and again this is a function of the fact that currently we're not quite producing enough graduates. So actually what's happening is demand hasn't reduced, it's the fact that particularly in many of these areas, so we're not producing enough design graduates, we've not got enough marketing graduates, believe it or not, we've not got enough law graduates, we've not got enough web design graduates, actually not law, we're alright for that, but we've not got enough IT graduates, and so the larger businesses with their larger brand awareness and their larger marketing spend can take the lion's share of their graduates and outcompete the smaller ones. So that's one of the things that we can do in higher education, and those involved with working with this group of young people or older people of job seekers is to help them with small businesses. It will help your economy in general. There's a village down that we're in at the moment. All the jobs are in London. We get this a lot, again, policy idea. London is the centre of everything. Everything happens in London. 1 in 6 of the UK population lives in the city. About 20% of the UK, or just under 20% of UK graduates live in London, and actually a slightly larger proportion of graduates start their careers here, although in quite a small area. One of the things that I tend to do every year is I do work with schools in Ealing. Now, of course, you know, most of you will know Ealing well. It's an affluent suburb of London, very, very good community suburb, just to the west of London. And they always say, can you come in and talk about the labour market in Ealing? And I say, well, that won't take very long, because there isn't one. There isn't a graduate labour market in Ealing, really. It's all in the centre of London. You've got the graduate labour market of a market, a small market town. So we mustn't think of London, if you're outside London, you mustn't think of London as being this huge dispersed labour market where all the opportunities are great. Anybody who works with universities in South and East of London knows that many of the young people who come to those universities are from very deprived areas of the country indeed, and are looking to get jobs in labour markets where there are very, very few opportunities. So most of these jobs are concentrated in a very small area of London. About 50% of the population in London are graduates. Anybody want to speculate as to what the population of what population of central Manchester are graduate?
20-something.
I'd say about the same.
There we go. There is somebody who knows it.
Charlie.
Because actually,
Crammed with universities, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is crammed, but also it's got a good quality skill, and the same is true. Good quality skill labour market. In fact, most university cities in the UK now have at least 50% of the central workforce as graduates. Last year, Liverpool and Southampton joined the list, but pretty much every large city with a university in it in the UK has at least 50% of the workforce in the central postcode of the city is graduate. The one exception is Birmingham. And the reason Birmingham doesn't have 50% of the population graduate is because it still has quite a strong centre of the city manufacturing presence. So it's actually still got quite a good workforce, quite a good, well-paid workforce of intermediate level, people with intermediate level qualifications. So most people and graduates never work in London. Most people in the UK will never work there at all. Most graduates will never work in London. What works in London does not necessarily work in the rest of the country. There are a lot of things that work very effectively. in London. The shape of the labour market is very different in London. Average weekly earnings in London are much higher than they are nationally, but not enough to compensate for cost of living. So although London is an excellent employment destination, and obviously it has the full range of employment opportunities, your average graduate on an average starting salary is likely to be better off at the end of the month after paying for bills in another city than in London. In fact, in most other cities. The only cities that I can say off the top of my head they will not be better off in are Brighton, Oxford and Cambridge because of the cost of living around there, and possibly some of the very low wage, or some of the lower wage areas of the UK. But most university cities, Hull might be an exception as well, although the cost of living in Hull is quite low. Aberdeen is probably the other exception. But most other cities in the UK don't have the range of opportunities that London has. What is going on is that the graduate population is getting increasingly urban. The graduate labour market is getting increasingly concentrated in the larger cities. And what we're seeing is that mass higher education is driving movement of people out of the periphery, out of smaller markets, smaller towns and rural areas in particular, and into the larger cities, which are getting increasingly urbanised. So, for example, if you look at the example around in the northwest, Manchester has thrived as a labour market, but has been palpably at the expense of the post-industrial, formerly thriving, quite independent towns around the city, places like Bury and Oldham and Rochdale and Stainbridge, Ashton-under-Lyne. All of those areas have actually suffered from the increase in employment in Manchester. Manchester was such a draw for the last a couple of years ago that it was actually taking talent away from West Yorkshire and Merseyside and the rest of Lancashire. But fortunately, those other labour markets have kind of equalised that, and now we're not drawing so many graduates and skilled people away with high salaries. But there is always this danger that when you're boosting the economy of a city, the graduate economy of a city, it may be at the detriment of other parts of other local areas. So on that subject, graduates are highly mobile. So we have this conception of the way the university is supposed to work. So you're a student, you're an 18-year-old, you're supposed to look at league tables. You're supposed to look at league tables which tell you which is the best university for the subject you're going to. So you take a look at league tables and you go, oh yeah, so here I am, I'm in Bristol. You can tell from my Bristol accent. So here I am, a Bristol student, I'm going to want to study English, Newcastle. That's the best university for me. And so that student then goes to Newcastle, and then they do 3 years of training, go to the excellent career service at Newcastle University, get all their advice, look at all the advice and guidance. So, oh, what are the best options for me for employment? Yes, they're in London, so I'll go move to London. And that's kind of the idea that we do. People will move. So young people will move to the best university for them and then get the best job options available for them, generally based on salary. That's not what actually happens, of course. So most graduates actually go to work in the region they went to university in. Most graduates went to work in the region they studied in. And most graduates go to work in the region they originally came from. Only 18% of graduates went to work somewhere. I actually did that. Moved away from home and then moved away again to work. Only 18% of graduates do what we kind of assume, or what the core assumption of the higher education sector is that graduates do. This pattern is long-standing. As far back as I can see, it turns out that young people were moving away from home and then either staying or coming back again when they're finished and not going somewhere else at all. And mobility may even be falling. And what this means actually, and I'm going to spoil a slide later on, it means that London is unique amongst all the big employment cities. Most of the people who start work in London are originally from London. What do graduates actually do? So, here's a good pattern. 40% working in the UK, 20% in further study, 15% in teacher training. That is what graduates did 50 years ago. That's data from 1967. This is what graduates do now. So back in the halcyon days of the 60s, before the post-92 expansion, or just after the Robbins expansion, before the post-92 expansion, when everything was brilliant, actually most graduates didn't go into work. Now they do. What we've got here is actually quite a good graduate labour market. So most graduates are going into work, about 55% working full-time, 12.3% working part-time, largely mature students. 5.3% going into work and study, so those are people who are working full-time and taking usually a professional development course straight away afterwards, or straight away as part of that, so they're accountants, marketing people, lawyers taking their professional qualifications. We saw a big increase last year in people taking further study because the postgraduate loan system is working. It's nice to be able to say that. The postgraduate loan system is working, which is popular and effective. The unemployment rate was the lowest it's been since 1989. The lowest it's been for new graduates since 1989. Only 4 times since 1976 has it been that low. Anybody know what the worst year to graduate was in the last 40 years? Anybody want to guess?
2009.
2009 only barely makes the top 10.
81.
Close.
83.
83. You've seen me do this before. It was 1983. Second worst year. Did anybody here graduate in 1983? We have no 1983 survivors. Second worst?
1992.
That's the third worst. That's the third worst. No, it was 1991. Any 1991 graduates here? I actually also graduated in 1992 because I did a master's course, which was the worst year to graduate from a postgraduate course. Actually, the last recession in labour market terms for graduates was quite bad, but not anywhere near as bad as the previous 2 recessions. And so the recovery has been quite robust, and we're now in quite a good graduate labour market in general. We'll see some figures on that, the whole economy later. If you want to make that comparison between in the last 50 years, it's a real change towards away from postgraduate study and towards employability. So if we look, nearly 20% took further PG, usually PhDs, and a further 15% trained directly as teachers. Only 40% went into work as opposed to 70% now. Graduates are clearly being prepared for the economy in a very different way than they were in those halcyon days. So if we look at the employment of graduates after 6 months, 15% in engineering. You can see where this is going again. This is what happened in 1967. So in 1967 we saw that engineering was the preeminent employment location for graduates. What's quite interesting actually is I had to do quite a lot of calculations on this work because they split it out for men and women. And furthermore, men and women had different job categories. So in 1967, for men, the church was a specific separate category because we had so many men going into clergy, whereas for women, the separate category was secretarial college. And also, there were only 23 female engineering graduates. We've changed a little bit. I think we've got 25 now. Oops, that not going through. There we go. This is our last comparison between 1967 and 2017, and actually the crucial thing is that red bar right at the end. This is the industrial classifications. And the reason why I'm showing it is just for that red bar. 42.3% of graduates in 2017 went into industries for which we have no classification at all in 1967. So around 40% of graduates go into industries, not jobs, but industries that had no meaningful presence in the UK economy 50 years ago. That's how much things have changed. When you consider that our biggest employer is hospitals, and that government and schools are still hugely important, and of course they were still there, much of the private sector, or many of the industries in the private sector, are completely new, have developed in a working lifetime.
Can I ask a question?
By all means.
I'm noticing the figure there for schools.
Yes.
It's gone up, and yet the number of teacher training has gone down dramatically.
Yes, that's right.
Can you explain that?
Yes, because actually I'm looking at first degree graduates here. So of course, what happened was people who were doing teacher training in NICEC, where they were just going into the new teacher training colleges, so they were going on to further study and not into work. So they weren't counted as being in employment.
And there are also 3 times as many graduates now, aren't there?
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, this is proportional. So although it's so we've got many more people going to work in schools than we did then.
So
From first degrees.
Okay, so when you say work in schools, that's not just people going to train that. To
No,
teach.
no,
That
absolutely.
could be a whole
This is
range
people
of
doing
different
undergraduate.
occupations.
This is people doing undergraduate. So I've not looked at PGCEs. The employment of PGCEs is a little bit dull, to be honest, because PGCEs tend to go and work as teachers. So the graph isn't very exciting. So I've just looked at first degrees. So we do have a lot of people from first degrees going to work in schools, but not necessarily as
I was
teachers.
going to say that's quite.
So they're working as administrators or teaching assistants, classroom assistants.
Teach first and
Yeah. All those people will be working in schools.
Different
Yeah.
forms of teaching, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So you've got people taking your undergraduate educational qualifications. So you've got people taking leadership qualifications, for example, but you've also got your early years and foundation years courses, which go into there. So we have got a lot more people working in schools from first degrees. But if we were to look at the PGCE data for 50 years ago to this year, it will be a very different pattern. We'd have more people going to schools, but probably not a large number more.
So can I just, sorry to be such a pain about this, but just to be clear in my mind, that would include somebody who's gone and been employed in a school as a careers advisor. with a
Absolutely,
degree
because this is
and
the
not just
industry of
yeah.
employment and not the occupation people who are doing it. So you're absolutely right. So somebody working, so we'll look at the occupational classifications, then you, if you were a careers advisor working in a school, you'd appear as a careers advisor.
Yeah.
This is the industrial classifications, so you'd appear as working in a school.
Right.
So likewise, so accountancy is low, but we've got a lot more accountants because a lot of them are working in local government and law and this bit.
Right, okay.
It's the industries in which they're working rather than the occupations.
Right.
And the reason why I've done it is because we didn't have a proper occupational classification system in '67. It's not at all comparable. So I can't do what jobs are you. The data is not doable. It took me ages to try and do it. So no, it's a perfectly good question. It's the difference between occupation and industry.
Right.
So to recap what the graduates do, we awarded about 317,000 first degrees. It was a slight rise on 2015, but a thing to bear in mind is, because of sheer demographics, we've got fewer 18-year-olds year on year and like to have fewer 18-year-olds year on year till about 2023. So we are likely to have fewer applicants to higher education, which means we're likely to have fewer degrees awarded year on year till the 2020s. So we cannot assume that the number of graduates is going to go up every year, as it has for a very long time before now. So we had a slight rise, but what we'd like to see is that this figure is going to be the maximum we see for a little while. Most are working, high employment, relatively low unemployment rate, and the number of graduates going into for the study is quite high. How are people working? Again, this is the point I'm trying to make. Most graduates are on normal permanent open-ended contracts. Got quite a lot of people on fixed-term contracts, although that is partly down to the fact that fixed-term contract is what a lot of medical professionals go into, so it's a junior doctor contract or a training year pharmacist or anybody doing their pre-qualification year is in that group. We don't have many people on many graduates starting their careers on 0 hours contracts, and not almost all, but the majority of those who do are in non-professional level employment, mostly in the care industry. There are some people in education in that area, but by and large, not that many. 4.6% are self-employed or freelance, and that number is going up. Doing some work looking at separation rates from into and out of self-employment, and seeing if that sheds any light on exactly what's happening there. But at present, it looks like that growth in self-employment and freelancing for new graduates is largely confined to a handful of sectors and is not touching much of the rest of the labour market. And then by and large, most graduates are working in a very conventional way as they have. Just to go back to what occupations graduates are doing. So this is occupational data. So health professionals are much the highest area. We do have an uncomfortably large number of graduates starting their careers in non-graduate employment in retail and service. I mentioned Green and Hensiker's work, and another thing they're looking at is they're getting concerned that since the recession, graduates going into those roles are starting to get trapped, because for a complex range of reasons, but one of the main reasons is pay rates are low in those jobs, and so in order to pay cost of living, people having to work longer and longer hours makes it harder to put together good job applications and see work. So we used to tell graduates any work experience is good experience. I'm starting to get worried that that might not always be the case, that people in these jobs are starting to get a bit trapped in there. On the more positive side, business and finance is 10% of the labour market. It's very wide. Marketing, PR and sales sector has got very, very large, largely down to marketing and advertising, and largely down to the growth in online business. So most online business has a marketing component attached to it. It means that the range of occupations and skills required by that industry is very, very wide indeed. It has skill shortages in a number of places, particularly at the very technical end, where marketing graduates with good quality IT and quantitative skills are very much in demand, but also at the very artistic end. So there's a really important and underfilled niche for good quality designers in that particular set of roles. So marketing graduates with really good arts and design skills are in demand. One thing that is a big concern is that science number. It is increasingly difficult for graduates with a first degree in science to enter the labour market and get jobs as scientists. It's partly a recessionary issue, partly because of our traditional long-standing over-reliance on the pharmaceutical industry as an employer of science graduates. When the pharmaceutical industry hit issues around 2007, 2008 that were recession-linked but not wholly due to that, more to do with underinvestment in R&D, and the fact that we had sold off much of our native pharmaceutical industry to overseas businesses who then found it easier to pull out of the UK rather than cut positions in their native countries, it had a very serious effect on the labour market for first degree scientists. Postgraduate scientists not too bad, we still do a lot of R&D, but basic science for first degree graduates is very difficult. Yes?
Hi, that really high health figure, is that health in medicine or health services?
Doctors, nurses, so this is occupations and not industries.
Yeah.
I've got the industry stuff in a minute. So this is health occupations, so doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, midwives.
So even with nursing apparently falling off the cliff at the moment, that's still really high.
Still 14,000 nurses a year. Nursing is much the most common occupation in the UK. The problem is, even though it's much the most common graduate occupation in the UK, we're not producing anywhere near enough of them.
Sorry, can you just say what the difference between health and health occupations is, please? Because you've got it on top.
Oh yes, sorry, childcare health occupations. So those are assistant roles. So these are below graduate level. These are below professional level occupations. So these are the healthcare assistant roles that are in there. So childcare health occupations. One's nursery nursing, classroom assistants, health assistant roles. So these are the professional. These are the professions of doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, midwives, and radiographers are the 5 big areas. So there we go, most common professional level occupations for graduates, nursing, doctors. It's an interesting list. Marketing is likely to take up second position in the next couple of years and become the second most common professional job for graduates, simply because of the rise in importance and demand for graduates in that area. But there is another thing that links all of those occupations. We're not producing enough graduates. They're all in shortage. Every single one of those top 10 occupations is in shortage. To the less obvious areas, HR and industrial relations officers, really I should rename that because it's largely recruitment consultants. And we're a bit short of recruitment consultants at the moment because we're in shortage of other occupations. Businesses call in recruitment consultants to deal with it. They need to recruit more recruitment consultants, and the recruitment industry doesn't have the best reputation. So in a good quality labour market, they struggle to recruit. So they're hit with a double whammy of increased demand and more trouble recruiting. And the big recruiters, the big recruitment agencies are well aware of this and are really, really trying to reform their business practices so they get a better reputation as employers. You find that amusing if you like? There's certainly a man himself, rod for own backs there, because they have not always treated their employees very well.
Can I raise a question?
Yeah.
On 1967 data, you showed 15% of graduates going to engineering.
Yes.
The last slide said something like 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
I'm always hearing there's a shortage of STEM, and STEM's rolled into, which is a very crude way, but and I don't see engineering on that list as a tool. So I'm just putting those together. And saying,
it's just the occupational. It's partly the way the occupational classification system breaks down. So. Not far below that are various flavours of engineer. So if you put all engineers together, they'd be on the list quite easily. Right. We've got 1,000 or so mechanical engineers every year, about 800 civil engineers, because that's all we train. Electrical engineers. We are short of every kind of graduate engineer except for electrical engineers. We're not short of electrical engineers quite at the moment, but we're short of every other kind.
We used to be.
We used to be, yes. We train. Electrical engineering is much the most common engineering degree. And actually, on the quiet, they have an unusually high unemployment rate.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question too?
Yeah, by all means.
The marketing associate professional. My take on marketing is it's one of those occupations quite hard to get into now at graduate level without a master's.
It's not really,
Are those people in call centres ringing people up?
No.
What's an associate professional?
It's because SOC hasn't kept rise with the work, hasn't kept up with how.
Yeah.
How
but what do you think those people are actually doing?
Marketing. They're general marketing. They're general marketing. So they're doing a huge range of things across the gamut of what we consider marketing.
Are we sure they're not selling?
Absolutely sure.
Social media marketing.
Social media is across the. It's things in market research. It's things involved in internet promotion. So people doing animation on websites or promoting websites, web designers, analytics people. Optimization people, you've got people involved in traffic management, they're all in marketing.
So is your take that that's a big number just because actually there are lots and lots of different marketing related
there's a couple of things going on. The industry has grown massively. I don't think it's true to say that it's a difficult industry to get into without masters. It might be a difficult industry to get into certain marquee employers without a master's who feel they can get away with it. But at the moment, certainly if you look at the if you look at the employer skills survey and the employer perception survey, particularly small businesses are struggling to find marketing staff.
If you look at all the graduate internship schemes that are around the country that universities are running, which are almost all with SMEs, look at the projects. Marketing, e-commerce. And technical IT.
It's marketing masters are popular for a bunch of reasons. We produced 5,500 first degree graduates went into marketing jobs, but only about 2,500 people took marketing degrees. And so MAs in marketing are actually popular because they are a really good way to get into an industry that actually has a much higher graduate demand than can be satisfied with people who are trained. So most people who go into the marketing industry don't have a formal marketing qualification at the moment. But it is true that some of the big advertising agencies, people who say we're advertising, not marketing, there's not quite a lot stronger religion. So the advertising agencies want masters. Most of the marketing organisations are sufficiently keen on getting enough people through the door that they're not fussy about the qualifications that they're asking for. Actually, it's a good qualification. It's a good degree to look at if you've got a 2-2 as well at the moment. This is the industry data, so there's health slightly higher because we've got more people working in the health industry than just health professionals. Retail's quite high because we've got graduates working the tills and in in roles in there. Education quite high, finance and law very high. What's important there is the reports of the death of manufacturing are greatly exaggerated, and if we produced enough engineers, manufacturing will be higher up that list still. But 5% of graduates go into the manufacturing sector, and that is with the decline in both oil and gas and pharma. Although oil and gas is coming back because the price of oil is on the quiet, climbing up quite steadily, and I think we'll start to see that industry making a comeback in the next couple of years in the UK as an employer, which will be to the detriment of a lot of other industries because they were hoarding labour, and particularly skilled labour. So if you look at the industries that primary employers of graduates, hospitals, much the largest employer of graduates. But again, it's an interesting list, mix of SME, of public sector and private sector, occupations, engineering, specific engineering businesses, so not manufacturing. These are businesses who say their primary function is engineering.
That seems to me to be where one of these new sectors are, where it's
right,
engineering consultancy, high tech, cable consultants, that kind of business. That's
right, and that's climbing up the list, and that is because that's engineering. That doesn't include any engineering and engineers working.
And they're doing the R&D that companies are not doing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what they do.
Except the Dysons of this world.
Yeah. So all your car manufacturers and your aerospace manufacturers that are doing well at the moment, not included in that, so they're an extra pool of STEM roles. How do graduates find their jobs? 5 main ways: through career services and related sources at their institutions, internship and placement, personal contacts, employer websites, and through recruitment agencies, hence the reason for recruitment agencies. What they're not doing, they're finding their jobs directly through is social media. They're using social media to signpost to other sources. So they are getting information about employment on social media, but they're not getting their jobs directly through it. They're mostly going to websites. Personal contacts are hugely important, and of course this graph changes strongly by different characteristics. It's different for gender, it's particularly different for class, particularly different for social class, and for certain industries. Businesses, on the other hand, most businesses would like to recruit solely through word of mouth because it's free. When they're not using word of mouth, most businesses use multiple methods of recruitment. They use their own websites as the next most common way of doing so than social media, than word of mouth. Then they use social media, recruitment agencies, government recruitment schemes, and career services. And so it's interesting to know that businesses are not always matching the way that they recruit with the most effective ways of actually getting people in the door. This is the graph for the Prime Minister. This is what overseas graduates do. So the largest group of overseas graduates from the UK stay here, pay an awful lot of money for our high quality postgraduate courses, thereby subsidising the taxpayer and the exchequer. Mrs. May, if you'd like to take this. And then they leave the UK to work. And when they're not leaving the UK, they come here to work in graduate level jobs, usually in sectors where we haven't got enough homegrown graduates. Or they'll go home. That's largely what they do. What they don't do is come here and claim benefits. A very, very quick run through postgraduate outcomes. So, comparison between doctors, masters and first degree, much as you'd expect. The unemployment rate for postgraduate qualifications is lower than it is for first degrees, and they're more likely to be in work. But when you look at master's graduates and split them, it's almost it's actually a 55-45% split. So 55% of masters studied full-time, masters graduates studied full-time. And these full-time masters graduates tend to be young. They're usually at most 1 year out of university. Whereas the part-time masters tend to be over 30 and usually have an employment history behind them. Now, of course, part-time masters do very well in the labour market. They usually go back to their previous employer, get paid very well, very likely to be in work. The full-time masters have an unemployment rate higher than their undergraduate counterparts. They're rather more likely to be in professional level employment because taking the qualification tends to have an effect on aspiration, but the labour market isn't necessarily there. We don't have a labour market for most master's qualifications. And this is what concerns me about this large increase in people taking master's qualifications this year. There are some vocational masters courses for which we have a very strong labour market. So the most in-demand job, or does anybody know which job, probably which occupation we're in greatest shortage of right now? Actually, it's nurses. Apart from nurses, proportionately, as a proportion of the workforce, most unfilled vacancies.
Teachers?
Not quite. Give it a couple of years. It's surveyors. We produce about a third the number of surveyors, and of course the surveyors is pretty much master's level qualification. Although the Bank of England is getting very concerned about agricultural workers right now. So some niche master's qualifications are in extremely high demand. Surveyors, radiographers, planners, social workers. All these master's courses are looking at areas of very significant labour shortage.
But that's not a postgraduate in say, English or history.
Exactly.
And there's a huge difference here.
The issue we've got here is that those qualifications, and particularly in English and history, two very popular courses, do not open any labour market doors. There is no labour market niche for those. There is no specific labour market niche for those qualifications. They're perfectly good qualifications for going back into the undergraduate or first degree labour market and getting a job if they're framed correctly. But graduates taking those degrees expecting their employability to automatically be boosted are mistaken. There's no evidence that it's happening.
Environmental sciences, where does that fit into the current trends?
It depends. Now, environmental science is still not a very common degree. It has a long and rather difficult history of relationships with the labour market, because what has tended to happen is legislative changes have brought about the need for environmental science specialists in different areas. So a good example was in the 90s in the water industry. Privatisation of the water industry, they needed to recruit a whole load of environmental scientists to develop water quality. But then what happened is they were taken on for the initial phase and then all laid off again. And I know, because I was one of them. And that's happened in the environmental science sector. And as legislative changes have taken place, you've needed environmental science specialists, but not always in long-lasting, in large numbers in long-lasting careers. And that's always been an issue in that sector. It's often been driven by political changes. And so it's not a very common degree. Some areas, so analysis, for example, so analysis courses, we are short of people willing to do an environmental analysis, but we're short of them for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because it's quite poorly paid, and it's often contract work, and a lot of it has recently been outsourced. So we've had that issue with the Government Forensic Service, for example, which actually took on quite a lot of analysts, good quality analysts on. So also the environmental industry has always had a bit of an issue with unpaid work. So I hope that going forward there'll be more opportunities available as green issues become more and more important. But the history of the way that sector works has always been a little. We've always got to bear it in mind. Full-time master's graduates, I'm going to skip through this because actually I've reached the end, and I'm about halfway through. So we've got full-time masters. For master's graduates, working for overseas masters is okay, but we've got quite a high unemployment rate. Bear in mind, though, that doesn't mean they're unemployed in the UK, Prime Minister. Actually, what tends to happen is people go home, and again, it's an aspiration question of whether those qualifications are really leading to extra work. Master's graduates are more likely to work in London than first degree graduates. They're also more likely to leave the UK, get jobs outside the UK. Most common jobs, nursing. Most common job for master's graduates as well. Now these are specialist nurses, usually senior ward sisters or surgical nurses, and we're short of all of those. People take leadership courses in secondary education. Business-related associate professionals, not elsewhere classified, are people who said, I'm a project manager, and then don't tell us very much about what projects they're managing, so we have to stick them in there. So what we've got there is we've got an interesting mix of people with specialist qualifications, social workers, marketers, so we do have a good good labour market for these MA qualifications. So on top of those 5,500 undergraduates going into marketing, we've got another 770 master's graduates. Really do need a lot of people entering the marketing industry right now.
But this excludes MBAs?
This includes MBAs. So actually, yes, we've got these MBAs, but the majority of our MBAs are overseas students and they leave the UK to take to work. So they're not in these figures. These are jobs for master's graduates in the UK. Should we say?
Are accountants in that third group?
No, accountants have their own separate class. They're probably on around about 400 to 450, if I remember correctly. So we do have quite a few accountants, but what we've got more of is people taking finance masters and going in as analysts and advisors, and particularly at the analyst end. And those people are earning quite a lot of money. Likewise, the IT people who are going in with IT masters and often going straight into team leadership roles. The HR and industrial relations officers, those aren't recruitment consultants, they are HR people. Got a lot of management consultants as well, on graduate training schemes. Most common industries, hospitals, but we've also got to remember universities are a hugely important employer of graduates, and particularly postgraduates. And universities do sometimes forget their importance and role as an employer. And one of the things I've been trying to do is remind institutions you're an important employer, work with the business community. So we've actually got quite a long list of potential industries for master's graduates, and it's nice to see at the bottom the arts do play an important role in the master's labour market. PhD outcomes pretty good. Overseas PhDs have pretty good outcomes. There's not a lot to say about the PhD labour market. It's not changed a lot. The recession didn't actually touch it a great deal. Most PhD graduates get jobs. Most PhD graduates leave higher education immediately and don't come back. So we mustn't, although the most important job for PhD graduates is in academia, most PhD graduates do not become academics and don't want to. A brief bit about migration, realising I've already overrun. So actually I'll skip over that graph. This is the more interesting one. So this is the balance of where graduates, actually the net balance of graduates employed versus domicile. So we can see London is a big net importer of graduates. A big net importer of graduates, but mostly for the surrounding reasons. Actually, the North West and Yorkshire are both currently net importers of university graduates. Largely because of Manchester and Leeds, both big importers. Yorkshire has been consistently an importer of graduates for many years. The North West is normally balanced, reasonably balanced. At the moment we're in the positive. We might be slightly in the negative next year. But actually, most of these regions are not... The further away from London you are, the less likely you are to be a big exporter of graduates. Northern Ireland being the exception, exports a lot of graduates to the Republic of Ireland and to Scotland.
It's really bad news for those economies, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Wales, Scotland and Ireland.
It is actually... Wales is losing a lot of graduates to the southwest, and particularly to Bristol. But also in the north, it's losing a lot to Liverpool and Merseyside. Because the labour markets are weak. Only Cardiff has a genuinely strong labour market in Wales. Cardiff does have a strong labour market, but even Swansea's labour market has suffered, and the North Welsh labour market is very weak at the moment for graduates, and it is a very serious concern. What's actually happening in a lot of these areas, so the east and southeast are very, very populous, and what you've got is you've got an interesting situation. So East Anglia in particular, what you've got is you've got a lot of people who are the children of professional families who've moved out, and they go to university, and then they come home to the towns in East Anglia where they're from, where there are no jobs. And they struggle in the labour market, and then they write articles in The Guardian about it. This is where graduates actually work. So Westminster is much the most important labour market for graduates in the UK. 80% of the working population in Westminster has a degree, 20% has a postgraduate qualification. But Birmingham and Manchester are the next two largest employment destinations, more than the square mile of London. Leeds and Glasgow will probably overtake the square mile within 2 or 3 years, simply because of the rate of growth of the graduate labour markets in those two cities, not because the city is particularly losing graduates, although it may as a consequence of Brexit. It's likely to be a little more affected than these areas. But this is a story of the large cities and the areas around, and the home counties, London and the home counties commuter belts. There are a couple of exceptions. Lancashire is a very large labour market in general, but actually Preston's graduate labour market is quite strong. And Oxfordshire is Oxford. Oxfordshire is very interesting because Oxford is the least affordable city in Europe to live in. Average house prices are currently running at 18.5 times average salary in Oxford, less affordable than London. And so Oxford is actually losing the number of graduates going to work there, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to get people to work there. Cambridge was on the list last year, it's dropped off because it's so hard to get people to move there. So some of these cities are significantly more affordable. So Liverpool, by contrast, average house price in Liverpool is 4.5 times average salary. Still quite high, but it's a bit better than 18.5 times. And since the new deep water port opened at the end of 2016 in Liverpool, we've seen a big leap forward in that jobs market. So Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Glasgow and Edinburgh have pretty much the full range of graduate job opportunities. There are very few jobs available in London that you can't get in one of those cities. Most of the other cities on this list have something missing or are something else, or quite a one industry. So Belfast is very, very IT oriented. It's got a very strong IT labour market. It's a bit lopsided. Liverpool doesn't have a very good SME market, SME sector, and not as strong a financial services sector as some of these areas. Cardiff's arts sector isn't quite as strong. Bristol's isn't too bad. It's still quite public sector oriented. If you think of the way the graduates move around the country very quickly, I'm coming towards the end, you'll be delighted here. So you split graduates into 4 groups, and this is depending on a matrix, or this is looking at a matrix of where they're from, where they study, where they go to work. Loyals are the easiest people to think about. So a loyal goes to a local university and stays locally to work. So this will be somebody from Bristol, goes to Bristol or University of West England and stays quite locally to work. Nearly half of graduates do that. They don't move. They stay. They're rooted. Stayers move away to go to university and then stay there to work. They're the smallest group of graduates, but they're increasing. And when you talk to graduates, actually, rather more of them want to do that because they stay where they've had their formative adult experiences, where they've made friends, their market they're familiar with. Returners go away to university and then come home to work. They are much, by a significant distance, the most likely to struggle in the jobs market. Now, one of the guidance challenges we have is that a lot of institutions still will only talk to their graduates. So if you're a returner, so say you're a returner from East Anglia, so you go away to Bristol University and you don't get a job in Bristol, you come home to Bury St Edmunds, where your family live, there aren't any jobs there. Who do you go to for guidance? Who can help you with graduate employment options around there? What options are available? You've no way of knowing. I was talking to the guy who runs the blog, the Financial Times blog, who's from Grimsby last week. He's from Grimsby. We were talking about this, and he said, "Well, I have a lot of friends from Grimsby who went to university and came home, and it was kind of assumed that leaving Grimsby at 18 and going back at 21, you'd have some intuitive knowledge of how to get a good job in Grimsby. Of course, nobody had any idea how to get a good job in Grimsby. There weren't very many of them available, and young people who leave home are generally not very cognizant of how to get a good quality job. So most of them have struggled. And that is a significant guidance challenge for this group. And then the incomers are the people who do what they're supposed to do. They move away from university and they move to where the jobs are for their subject. They're only 18% of graduates. It's down from previous years. It's down year on year. 42% of all of the incomers work in London, and incomers are the largest group of graduates in London. And I think that's one of the reasons why we kind of assume that's what graduates do.
You mentioned class earlier.
Yes.
Huge correlated to that.
Every demographic factor you can think of affects these. So gender, women are more likely to be loyals and less likely to be incomers. Ethnicity, so white Britons are much more likely to be incomers. people from higher social classes are very, very much more likely to be incomers. Age also plays a factor. So yes, there are a lot of factors in play. It is very class oriented. So your incomers are very largely affluent, white, middle class people, men. Not always, but very largely. I don't think we need to restate it. Just to give you an idea of how unusual London is, see, 34% of graduates working in London last year were incomers, whereas in the Northwest, most of the graduates who went to work in the Northwest had never moved, had studied locally and were domiciled locally. And only 10% were incomers. Northern Ireland, almost everybody who works in Northern Ireland is Northern Irish. Scotland, before the change in university fee structure, had a pattern much considerably more similar to the rest of England, but now has become a very closed-off labour market. Very closed-off labour market. It's really, really shut tight. And so we can see that in much of the country, the majority of graduates haven't moved. Has a lot of implications in terms of guidance, has a lot of implications for employers looking to recruit, particularly if they're looking to recruit out of the traditional graduate employment centres. So if you're an employer looking to recruit in Plymouth, say, actually almost everybody who applies for your jobs will have either studied locally or be from Plymouth looking to return home. That has a lot of implications if you're looking for niche roles in many occupations, and it's been this sort of thing has been this sort of issue has caused a lot of problems for employers, particularly in technical disciplines. It may be one of the reasons why we're believed to have a STEM problem, when in fact quite a lot of science degrees have quite high unemployment rates. It's because people are not where they need to be.
You know when you had that slide earlier when you were looking at net migration,
yes,
saying that the south, east and east.
Yeah. I'm looking at domiciles because
that looks interesting compared to that.
Yeah.
The latest slide.
Yes.
In that you seem to have much more mobility in east of England and south east.
There's a lot of interplay across borders because actually, people don't really. There's not a hard border, obviously, between the border between. So Essex is in the east of England, but Kent is in the south east. But we know there's movement between the two areas. So there is a certain degree of mobility, and bear in mind that the volumes of people here are also very, very different. So there are a lot more people working in the south east than there are in the East Midlands. A lot more people. So when you do it in numbers terms, the south east of London are much, much larger. So though you've got that balance, the number of people, the actual number of people in the net movement looks a little different when you're looking at raw numbers. Yes?
So these people, there might, for example, that east of England
Yes.
returners, 40-odd% come back.
Yeah.
But this isn't saying they actually get any work.
No. They are working. These are people who are employed, but not necessarily in graduate level jobs.
Okay.
If you look at the graduate level jobs, so this group, 40% of the employees in the east of England, the east of England graduate labour market outside of Norwich is pretty weak. So that's a bit of a problem, especially if that's actually a populous county, a populous area of the country in terms of graduate supply. So what you've got there is you have a lot of people going home into poor quality employment they were not expecting to go into.
Charlie?
Yes.
Quick question. So is this from the Delhi data, 6 months after graduation?
Yes, so it is. So when we get graduate outcomes data after 15 months, we expect to see this pattern change, and I expect to see the returns in particular fall quite significantly.
That's what I was thinking, exactly, yeah.
How much, it's not quite clear, because it'll be very interesting to see how often people move, actually physically move location in the early parts of their career. And it'll be really, really interesting to see what that mobility is, because we don't know a lot about it.
Well, I have a hunch that the incomers will grow in London at about 25, perhaps.
Possibly so. We do know that in the end, though, they move out again.
Yeah.
So they move out at around 30, at about the age that people start to settle down and want a house with a garden and stairs.
I feel like I'm a model for you.
Yes. Yeah, so it will be really, really interesting. I'd love to get this data at age 25, and then age 30, and then 35. Because what I suspect you'll see is what you'll actually probably see by 35 is you'll see a lot more returners, but in better quality jobs. Or you'll see a lot more stayers as people move back to where they and their friends have their formative experiences. But it's only conjecture, and we don't have data.
We saw at Cambridge that there was a lot of people who would leave the city, but they would come back because it's a rich labour market.
Yes.
Because it's perfectly possible to prosecute 2 careers in that labour market.
Yes.
The civil service think it will show up in longer and longer journeys to work. They say what's happening to their people in their 30s is they're still working in London, but they're living further and further away.
Yeah.
And so travel to work, especially around the southeast, affects those figures.
I think to an extent that's happening, but also we can also see that for people in their 30s, I think there's a net migration out of London again. So I'm not sure.
But to work?
Yeah. They're leaving.
They're working out.
Yes. I mean, certainly in Manchester, for example, we're seeing a lot of mid-career people leaving other parts of the country, particularly London, and getting jobs in Manchester. And it's becoming a good destination for people at that point to do that kind of thing. It's really helping to boost, particularly the financial services labour market in Manchester. So I wonder how much the civil services view is coloured by the fact that they're civil servants who work in London, and that's what they do. I'm going to very, very quickly do the last bit because we're well overrun a little bit. So the situation is, at the moment, the economy is growing. Chambers of Commerce are expecting the economy to grow. Bank of England is expecting the economy to grow. That's more Chambers data. Employer Skills Survey is expecting these particular sectors to grow, especially in 2018, across all areas of size. So we're seeing education, health and social. This is across the whole economy. So education, mostly graduates. Health and social work, mostly graduates. Business services, mostly graduates. Hotels and restaurants, not mostly graduates. Financial services, mostly graduates. Arts and other, mostly graduates. Wholesale and retail, not so much graduates. Manufacturing, mostly graduates. Transport and comms, mostly graduates. And construction, about 50-50 in terms of employment demand right now. And primary sector and utility, not mostly graduates, but most of the major growing sectors are graduates. So these are the 2 Brexit slides. In the last 12 years, the proportion of the workforce with NVQ4+ has risen from 30% to 43.5%. It accelerated during the recession. At the same time, people with lower qualifications were pushed out of the labour market and didn't come back. This always happens in recessions, but it particularly starts because of the large rise in the number of graduates that were available. And so we've just seen an enormous number of graduates enter the workforce. But it's not credentialisation. It's what's happened here. So these 3 are the professional level, these are professional level jobs. And over the 10 years from 2006 to 2016, which included the recession, so the recession started in 2008, finished around 2013, so half of this time we were in that terrible recession, and we added 2.5 million new, there is no replacement demand touched here, this is expansion demand only, 2.5 million new professional level jobs, 247,700 a year on average, year on year, every year for the 10 years of the recession. If you're not a graduate, it's increasingly difficult to access those roles. Your good quality jobs, we lost 500,000 of them. These are the ones with pay and progression, holiday pay, pensions, security. So we're still 105,000 skilled tradespeople down the way we were before the recession, for example. 428,000 administrative and secretarial roles, particularly roles taken by women there. And we've replaced them largely with long hours, insecure, low-paid work in care and elementary occupations that CIPD reckon estimated needed a level of education equivalent to that of an 11-year-old. That's why Brexit happened. Because if you're not a graduate, the recession hasn't ended. It is still going on. If If you are a graduate, it ended. In fact, if you are a graduate, particularly if you were a working graduate, most working graduates were not touched. The major effect that it had on most working graduates was that their mortgages got cheaper. For non-graduates, they lost their jobs and couldn't get them again. It's a cheerful note to end on, isn't it? But the labour market can tell us things. That's the net changes in the professional labour market in 2016. We added 441,000 jobs. You see all areas of the graduate employment net, market expanded, apart from shopkeepers and publicans, who lost their jobs in large numbers. A national tragedy that pubs are closing. And we also lost a number of youth workers, public funded youth workers, largely in London and the South East. All other areas expanded, some of them very strongly. And that's the employment rate, just to demonstrate. So that's the peak of the employment rate in the last recession. That's where it was in 1991 when poor unfortunates like me graduated. But that's where it was, 13.6% graduate unemployment in 1982. Early graduate unemployment. Pretty grim. Pretty grim. It wasn't anywhere near as bad. We peaked at 8.3. No, 8.9. We peaked at 8.9 in 2011. Right, I'm going to end there because we've only got 5 minutes for questions and I've really banged on from that hour's lecture. Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. Hope that was useful and interesting. If anybody has any questions, please fire away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's just absolutely breathtaking, really, in terms of the amount of data that we're working with.
Sorry about that.
No, in a good thing.
Yes.
What occurred to me was if you're a parent and you decide to go and move out of London and go live in East Anglia, you're actually not, you think you're giving a quality of life to your children, but actually the consequence of that longer term, it's not good, is it?
As long as you tell them don't come home when you graduate. In fact, because I've moved to North East Cheshire, there are no jobs. If my kids go away to university and come home, there aren't any jobs for them. But you know, I'm a careers professional, and of course, as we all know, our children listen to us and take our sage advice. But you're absolutely right. If you want to give your kids the best possible chance, move to a big city.
I saw a report last week that said something about high flyers, said that there'd been a downturn in graduate jobs. Got any comments about that?
Yes, now a high flyer survey is a very interesting survey because the high flyer survey is based on the Times Top 100. Does anybody know how the Times Top 100 is collected?
It's brand awareness, isn't it?
Basically, it's a marketing survey. So they ask finalists who they think the best employers will be. So it's a survey of employers conducted, and the people who answer the survey have never had a job. Who are the best people to work for, as believed by people who haven't worked for them? So we've got to, and it's only done at certain universities. So what's happened there is that, and they are marquee employers, and that group of employers have said that they are likely to recruit slightly fewer people this year. The ISE, who've also done their survey, think it's going to increase slightly. I would say, actually on balance, and particularly Brexit is a dog that hasn't barked as far as the graduate labour market is concerned. We've seen no real effect of Brexit on the graduate labour market.
We haven't left yet.
Exactly. We haven't left yet, but employers haven't done anything yet. They probably will this year. Jim O'Neill said this morning he thinks that economic growth is sufficient to actually compensate for that. I'm not sure, but what I do think is that Brexit is likely, and this year we may see a modest downturn in the graduate labour market, nothing to get worried about. And if Brexit does have an effect on the graduate labour market, it will be a speed bump rather than a cliff. I cannot in all conscience say the same thing about other sectors. It is quite possible that it will have a significant effect on those sectors that are reliant on less skilled overseas labour and can't substitute. So agriculture in particular may be bad for. But for graduates, this year is likely to be much the same as last year. There might be some changes in different sectors. So, for example, as I mentioned, the oil and gas industry on the quiet is getting back up. The UK oil and gas industry is getting back off its knees, so that might be good. But then it'll have a knock-on effect because they were a core, or one of the reasons why we were short of engineers, because they hoarded them all. They could offer more money than anybody else. So we started to get short of civil engineers, pilot engineers, mechanical engineers. And when they started to lay people off and stop recruiting, it meant, particularly the SME sector, we're able to recruit more people. But it will increase average salaries and improve the economy of North East Scotland in particular. On the other hand, the finance industry is realistically likely to at least move people out of the UK. It may not actually lay that many people off. It might just move the jobs. And it might well still recruit UK graduates to do those roles. It could be that 2018 is a very, very good year for graduates who want to work overseas.
I'm seeing, though, in oil and gas, businesses who are repositioning themselves quite dramatically from the UK to Holland to Bangalore, etc.
Okay.
And then you've got the North East, where the North Sea's pretty well pumped out now. And so I'm not as optimistic as you are about oil and gas, because I think there are other issues going on there. But you're right.
To be fair, I've not spoken to anybody from the industry for a couple of months. They were starting to get a bit more optimistic in November, December.
Well, certainly on the price, that's true.
Yeah.
But I think there are other cost-saving pressures that are taking place.
I think,
in those industries.
and pivots in industrial focus as well that may be taking place. So actually, yes, I'll defer to you there, Peter. You'll know more about that.
I don't think it's just a price issue.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence of increasing entrepreneurism in graduates?
Yeah.